Hi, and welcome to Crafts with Ash DIY and Decor. My name's Ashley, and today I am bringing you 10 sunflower-themed tier tray DIYs. I've been wanting to do this sunflower theme for a while because I think that it's a great segue into fall, so I could not wait to get creating. We're going to get into those in just a minute, but first, if you haven't done so already, please don't forget to subscribe to my YouTube channel, then hit that little notification bell so you can get notified anytime I upload a new video. Also, hit that drop-down menu and click all so you get notified every time I upload all my new videos. I am so close to 7,000 subscribers, and I would love for you to be one of them. Then after that, jump on over to Instagram and Facebook and join my crafting community by liking and following me there. I post behind the scene content that I know you're not going to want to miss. So just like my other tier tray videos, I am going to show you the final reveal of all of my projects at the end, and you're going to have to stick around to see my absolute favorite DIY because it is the last one. Let's get started. This first DIY is so easy. I picked up this little wooden home sign from Crafter Square at the Dollar Tree, and I'm going to give it a foam-stained look by taking a baby wipe, dipping it in some Waverly Antique wax, and just basically rubbing it all over my sign. After that, I'm going to take my sanding sponge and I'm going to sand it down just a little bit to bring out that natural wood from underneath. Then I'm going to take this pack of stickers that I got from the Dollar Tree, and these stickers were basically my inspiration for all of my DIYs today. So I took one of the sunflowers and I simply just stuck it on the O. And that was it. It was that simple. For the next DIY, I'm going to take this sun cutout that I got from the Dollar Tree as well, and I'm going to remove the inside part of the sun. Next, by using my Maze chalk paint from Waverly, I'm going to go ahead and paint this entire sun. Now, in this video, my three main colors are going to be a type of yellow, a green, and a brown. Those are going to be all the colors that are my main colors, with accents of blue as well. So after I put the Maze color on, I went in with my Apple Barrel Bright Yellow, and I kind of just dry brushed that on top to add different layers of color and some dimension. Now I started to paint the edges or the sides around, but then I really liked the dark wood, so I just kept it. Now all of these are going to be rustic looking, and I really loved how they came out. So I just kind of went back and forth between both of my yellows and just started layering them to again add more detail and dimension. After that, I went in with some pumpkin orange and I dry brushed that on there with my chippy brush. Now, I did make sure to start from the middle and brush out. That way, all of my orange was going in the same direction. After that, I put it off to the side and I grabbed the middle part of my sun. So next I took some Waverly Antique Wax and I basically just painted the front of that circle. Now I did not wipe it off with a baby wipe or anything. I just kept it as is. Then once that wax was dry, I took this brown burlap and I basically just cut it to fit on that circle. Now this is going to kind of create the seeds that would be in the middle of a sunflower. So I just covered the whole circle with that. Real quick, I want to take this opportunity to welcome you to my YouTube channel. If you're new here, thank you so much for choosing to stop by today. I really hope that you love what you see and that you choose to stick around by subscribing to my channel. If you're returning, thank you so much for coming back. I hope that you love what you see today, and I hope that you are a subscriber as well. Well, let's get back into the DIYs. So after my circle was covered, I took that chippy brush and some orange paint, and I basically just dabbed it on the top, and then I went through with the Waverly Antique Wax, and I kind of just went back and forth between the orange and the brown. That way it added more dimension and looked like seeds of a sunflower. After that, I replaced the center of my sun back into the sun, and now it is a beautiful sunflower. Now, to help make my little sunflower stand on its own, I took one of the blocks that I got in a pack from the Dollar Tree, and I simply just hot glued it to one of my little petals of my sunflower. Now, to do this, you want to make sure to stand it up and kind of tilt it back a little bit so it naturally just stands up. So then to complete this, I took one more sticker from that sheet of stickers and I stuck it right in the middle, and that was it. For my next DIY, I am taking a metal flower. Now, I picked up a ton of these, and if you caught my video of 4 ideas for these metal flowers, then you probably know where I'm going with this one. I'll drop that down in the description box just in case you missed it. But the first thing I did was lift up all of the petals so that way I can easily get to the bottom layer. Then I took my bright yellow apple barrel paint and I'm just dry brushing over the orange. Now, this one happened to be orange. If it wasn't, I would have painted this entire thing yellow, a solid yellow, and then added the orange with some paint. But I lucked out and I had an orange one left, so I just dry brushed some yellow over it. Once it was dry, I took some burlap and I cut off a little circle to fit inside of my sunflower. Now, before I glued that on, I took that chocolate bar apple barrel paint and I painted the middle of my flower. Then after that dried, I hot glued that piece of burlap right on top, and then I put so much paint, I just used that to cover over the burlap to give it the texture of the seeds. Next, I put that off to the side and grabbed this sign that I got from the Dollar Tree. And the first thing I did was remove the little house that was in the middle. So I pulled that off. It came off really easy. And then I took that chocolate bar paint again and I just painted the bottom of that sign. Now, it did not cover it fully, and that was okay because not a lot of it is going to show, but I was careful not to get it on the inside white part. Once that was dry, I took another one of those blocks and I hot glued it to the block that was already there to give it some height, and then by using my super glue and my hot glue, I went ahead and glued my sunflower on the blocks. Now again, with metal, you can't just use hot glue because hot glue and metal don't get along, so you have to use something other than hot glue. And then to add one final touch, I dry brushed some Waverly Antique Wax all around the frame and a little bit on my sunflower as well. For my next DIY, I grabbed this little block that I got from Crafter's Square, and the first thing I did was cut off the twine hanger on the block, and then I used some spackling to cover in the hole. Once that spackling was dry, I did go ahead and sand it off so that way it was nice and smooth. Then I took a baby wipe in that Waverly Antique Wax, and I'm going to faux stain my wood piece. After that, I took my sandpaper and I sanded it down just a little bit so that natural wood underneath came through. Then I took a chippy brush and my ivory chalk paint, and I'm just dry brushing over the antique wax. And then again, I'm going to sand over that to blend everything in. Next, I took this green burlap ribbon that I got from the Dollar Tree, and I cut off a little piece to fit in the middle of my little block. Now, I did decide to cut off the hems or the edges. That way I could fray the sides of this little piece. Next, I took this little truck sticker and a sunflower sticker, stuck them together, and I apologize, I lost footage of that, and then I hot glued the truck onto the little green piece of burlap. I lost footage of that too, I apologize. And then I'm going to take these foam pop-up letters and I'm going to spell out fresh picked 25 cents. Now, at this point, I didn't know how I wanted to arrange my little sign, so I kept kind of messing with it, and then this is what I decided. So I have my truck in the bottom right-hand corner, and then my wording off to the side. So then after I decided that that's where I wanted it, I took some twine that I had already wrapped. It was already glued from a different DIY, and I had just pulled it off, and then I just simply put it on the side of that little wood piece. Then I cut down my little green ribbon again, and I slipped it underneath the twine this time, and then I'm going to glue that truck on top of the twine. I'm sorry this is so choppy. It just did not help that I lost some footage. I don't know what happened, but I promise it was so easy to do. Finally, to make those black letters pop just a little bit more, I dry brushed that ivory chalk paint over the letters and a little bit over the entire sign as well. Then I took a little twine bow that I also had left over, and I hot glued it on top of the sunflowers on the top right of my sign. And that completed this little wooden piece. Now, off camera, I did go through with my white paint marker, and I painted all of those letters with that because I just still felt that they just didn't pop and that it was just too dark. But you'll see that in the final reveal. Next DIY, I took this little jewelry tray, and I got this a while ago, but I purposely saved it because I had this in mind, and I simply painted the entire thing except for that little middle section with that Maze Waverly chalk paint. Then I went back and forth between the bright yellow paint and the Maze paint, again just to give it some layers of paint in the yellow and some dimension. Then I took that orange paint, that chippy brush, and I added just a little bit of orange on my petals as well. Then I also brushed over it with that Waverly Antique wax. Now for the center, I decided to cover it in some twine. So I started at the bottom and then just simply hot glued it down and then wrapped and wrapped and wrapped and then hot glued it again. So I didn't hot glue on every wrap around, just every so often. And then as I got to the top, I did add more and more hot glue. That way it all stuck together. After that, I took my scissors and just trimmed off any of the stray hairs on my twine. I know a lot of people use lighters, but I kind of have a fear of fire, so that's just my method of doing it. And then I decided that it just needed a little bit more detail, so I took that orange and yellow and dry brushed it back on. Then the middle was just a little too light for a sunflower, so I took that chocolate bar paint again and I simply just painted all of my twine to darken it up. And I did use a makeup sponge to do this, and I just kind of dabbed it all over. Finally, I took this wall decal that I got from the Dollar Tree, and there were two little bees on it, so I took one and put one above the little middle section, and then I took a second one and put it underneath, and now we have a cute little sunflower. Next up, I took this pack of wooden cutouts that I got from the Dollar Tree, and I took out all of the palm trees. Now, to do this next step, I took some painter's tape and I curled in the ends, and then I taped it down so the sticky part was up, and then I put all of my palm trees on the tape. That way it's easy for me to paint. Next, I painted the tops of the palm trees with my maize paint, and then again, I kept going back and forth between the maize paint and the bright yellow paint to give it that dimension. Next, I took some green paint and I painted the stem of my little palm tree. Can you guess what we're making these into? Now, you're gonna have to tell me if this is a stretch or if these look like sunflowers. I keep going back and forth. So then to add the little middle section, I took these bubble stickers from the Dollar Tree and I painted 4 of them with that chocolate bar paint, apple barrel paint. And before I put those on, I took that orange paint again and just dry brushed over the yellow part of my sunflower, and I also did the same with the Waverly Antique wax. Then I took those little stickers and I put them right in the middle of my sunflowers. So again, you're gonna have to let me know whether these look like sunflowers or whether they look like palm trees. Would you know that they were palm trees if you didn't see this? So next up, I took this little mini terracotta pot and I dry brushed some ivory chalk paint all around the sides. And then I took some foam and I'm going to put some foam in the middle because we are going to stick our little palm trees in our pot. So I just cut off little pieces and just made sure the entire center was filled with the foam. To clean up my little mess of the foam, I used my little ladybug. Keep in mind that any tools that you see me use, they're probably in the description box down below, so you can pick up one for yourself. Now, as I was testing and putting my little sunflowers in the pot, I decided that they needed to be raised up a little more. So I just broke off little pieces of a skewer and just hot glued it to the stem. Then I'm going to push them in the foam at different heights. Once I had my sunflowers arranged how I liked, I went ahead and stuck some moss in my pot, and I did glue down some areas, that way it wasn't so flimsy and would fly right off or fall out. And then I just kind of worked with my pot a little bit until I had my sunflowers look exactly how I wanted. Next, I took some twine and I hot glued it to the middle section of that top part of my terracotta pot, and I wrapped it around a few times and then cut it off in the back and hot glued the end down. Then I made a simple shoelace bow with my twine and hot glued that to the front of my pot. Now, as I was arranging this, I noticed some of the skewer was poking out, so I did decide to pull my little sticks out and paint them in that same green that I used to paint the stem. Then, after they were dry, I stuck them back in, and now I have this pot of sunflowers. Next up, I grabbed this crate that I actually bought for 50 cents at Michael's in the spring, and I was going to use them for my daughter's birthday party, and then I didn't end up using them, so now I have a bunch of them. So I just took my baby wipe and my Waverly Antique Wax, and I faux stained my little basket. Then I dry brushed the ivory paint over my basket, and then I'm going to sand it all down to help it blend in. This is your friendly reminder that if you're loving what you see today, don't forget to give this video a thumbs up. Not only does it really help my channel to grow, but it also tells YouTube that you're loving my content and that you want to see more, and they'll start sticking my videos in your homepage. So if you would ever be so kind, please give this video a like. I would greatly appreciate it. After my basket was ready, I took some burlap, and again, I'm going to cut off a long piece and then cut off the edges to fray my piece of burlap. I apologize for all of the random things that are being thrown into my shot here. My daughter was hanging out with me and she kept taking things out of my craft stash and throwing them at me to ask if she could play with them. So I apologize for all the random stuff. After my burlap was frayed, I stuck the burlap into my basket, and then I'm going to take these sunflowers that I got from the Dollar Tree and I removed them from the stem and then just started arranging them. Now I did end up only using 3, and you can see I have 3 orange and yellow ones, and then I remembered that I had just some solid yellow ones too, so I thought that that would break that up a little bit. After that, I took this little chalkboard tag that I also got from the Dollar Tree, and with my chalk pen I wrote 50 cents right on top, and then I just clipped that to the little handle. Then I thought that there was a lot of yellow going on in my basket, so I decided to take some of the leaves off of the stems and stuck those kind of in between all of the flowers, and I really thought that that helped break up all of the yellow. So this is so simple. You don't have to have this exact crate. The Dollar Tree sells a ton of different crates, so you can still achieve this look by buying one of those. But how easy was that DIY, and it adds so much color, and it's so fun. For my next DIY, I'm going to take this little picture holder stand, I guess that's what you would call it, and I removed it from its packaging, and then I am going to pop that little hanger off of the top and the bow, but keep the bow near because we are going to use that. Now there is a hole that is left after you pop that thing out, but I just left it there. I sanded it down a little bit because I will be covering it. Next, I took my antique Waverly wax and I'm just dry brushing some of that on this little picture holder. Next, to blend it all together, I sanded the entire thing down. After that, I'm going to flip it over and I'm going to hot glue twine to the top of my frame. Now you do see a little sticker there. Ignore it because I do end up kind of moving it around and switching it. So I just hot glued the twine to the top and I purposely covered the hole, and then I'm going to do the same thing to the bottom. So prior to doing the twine, I actually hot glued one of the little sunflower stickers from that sheet onto the bow, and that's also where I got this little sunflower sticker as well. So when I started making this, I really had no idea what I was doing, so I kind of just created it as I went. But I just took more of those stickers and I stuck them in the middle of the twine, and then I hot glued the bow to the side of the twine on the top left, and it was perfect. It was easy. It took minutes to do. For my next DIY, I'm going to take this gnome, and this was originally a patriotic gnome that I got around the 4th of July, and I had painted it, and then it went into the Island of Misfit DIYs because I never ended up using it. So now I'm going to repaint the whole thing except for the little face and the hat with some Waverly chalk paint in white. After that was dry, I took this sunflower themed kitchen towel that I got from the Dollar Tree, and I cut off a little section because I'm actually going to cover the hat with this. To adhere my towel to the gnome, I simply use some hot glue. Now this gnome is metal, so technically I probably should have used some super glue, but it seems to be holding up okay. So I hot glued the brim first, and I purposely put the hem at the bottom so it kind of was the ending to the hat, if that makes sense. So it kind of had a finish to the hat. And then I just trimmed it down and then flipped it onto the back and hot glued the fabric around to the back of the hat. After my hat was finished, I took some black acrylic paint and I painted the shoes of my little gnome. Next, I took that bright yellow paint and I painted his shirt with that, and then I took some orange paint and painted his pants. Now, I'm going to be honest, this probably isn't my favorite DIY. I had something completely different in my head, but it just didn't end up looking like how I thought it was. I still think it turned out cute, but I don't know. Let me know in the comments what you think about it. So at this point in my DIY, sorry about my head, it was kind of looking a little bit like candy corn. So I knew I had to break all of that up with some green ribbon. P.S. Great idea to make a candy corn themed gnome. That might be coming soon. All right, so I took some of this green burlap again and I cut off a little strip, and then I hot glued it to the brim of his hat. Then I'm going to cut off another little strip and I'm going to make a little belt. After that, I took another one of those sunflower stickers and I stuck it right in between his hands. Then to add some detail, I took my black paint marker and I'm just adding some stitching around his pants and his shirt. Next, I took this little puff ball and I hot glued it to the tip of his hat. And then I took some yellow paint and I dry brushed that over his black shoes because I just felt like they needed a little bit more detail. Now, as I was looking at this, I realized that the belt was actually in the wrong spot. So I peeled it off and then I'm going to cut the seam part of the ribbon, which you'll see in a minute, so the wired part. And then I'm going to hot glue that a little higher than what I originally had, just right there. Now, I did realize that this is also in the wrong spot. It's actually supposed to go up a little where that indent is. But that's okay. I mean, it still worked. So then I just added some hot glue to the back to reinforce it. So now that I moved the belt, the stitch lines were kind of weird looking now. They were off. So I added several coats of the orange paint to try to cover the stitch marks that were there. And then after that dried, I just went ahead and repainted my stitch marks on. Now, I just felt like it needed one more thing. So I took that chocolate brown paint and I painted his little nose because it was pink before and it kind of just looked odd. So I painted his little nose and then I ended up just dry brushing that paint all over this, and I don't know, it kind of added something and brought it to life. I kind of felt like this tied it all together. I don't know. Let me know what you think of this specific project. Like I said, I don't believe it's one of my favorites. I mean, it's okay, but I think I've done better. Okay, we finally made it to the 10th and final DIY, and it just so happens to be my favorite. So I grabbed this picture that I picked up from the Dollar Tree, I removed it from its packaging, and then I pushed out the picture part. I flipped it over, and then I painted the back white. Now I know what you're thinking, it's already white, why are you painting it? It's because it looked a little bit too much like cardboard, so I wanted to give it a brushing of that Waverly chalk paint in white. Once that dried, I took a ruler and I placed it in the middle of my board, and then I drew a line on the top and on the bottom. Then I just continued drawing lines all the way across the board. Then I took my finger and I smudged all of my pencil marks to make it look like shiplap. After that, I took my chippy brush and Waverly Antique Wax and I dry brushed that all over my board. I absolutely love that look. Next, I sanded it all down to make it all blend together. After that, it was time to replace the board back into the frame, so by using some hot glue, I glued the backing back in. Finally, I'm going to take these wall decals again, and I'm going to take the single sunflower and I'm going to place it on to my board. Now, of course, the whole thing is not going to fit, so I just used the upper half. And at first, I had it hanging off, but then you're going to see that I actually move it down so the whole sunflower is on the board. So I just place it on there. I cut off the stem that was hanging over, and then I cut off the leaf that was also attached to it as well. And then this is when I'm going to move it down. First, I tried to push it over just to see if I like it, but I didn't. So I took it off, and now I'm going to move it down. And then the part that is hanging over the board onto the frame, I'm actually going to take my scissors and I'm going to cut that off because I don't want it to cover the bottom of the frame. I'm going to zoom in here in just a second so you can see exactly what I am talking about. Now, I would use my little knife, but I couldn't find it, so the scissors worked just fine. But as you can see, I'm just kind of cutting in between the frame and the board. That way the stem or the leaf ends right at the bottom of the board. I hope that makes sense. After that, I decided that I wanted to add another leaf to that left side of my sunflower. So I simply just cut it out off of that decal, and then I just placed it right on to my board. Then I'm going to go back and I'm going to trim up the parts of the petals that are hanging over. And then to protect my decal, I am going to give this a layer of Mod Podge. And that was it. That completed this last and final DIY. How easy was that? And it just so happened to end up being my favorite one. And now that that DIY is finished, it is now time for our final reveal. I absolutely loved how this tier tray came out. This did take me a while to try to figure out. That's why I did not record it. But after it all came together, I really loved the look. I think it is a great segue into fall. And the great thing about sunflowers is that it could be either summer or fall. So it could really last a long time. You're going to have to let me know in the comments what you think of my tier tray. I want to thank you so much for joining me today. And if you have not already, please subscribe to my YouTube channel, then hit that little notification bell so you can get notified anytime I upload a new video. And also, if you would give this video a thumbs up, I would greatly appreciate it. Well, until I see you again, I'll craft with you soon. Bye!